I stood perfectly still in the grand foyer of the Lumiere, Boston's most exclusive private club, as a furious woman in a Chanel suit screamed that I didn't belong, her voice echoing off the imported marble. Eleanor Thorne, a legacy member with a reputation for vicious racist tirades, was actively dialing the police, demanding my immediate arrest for trespassing and loitering. She had absolutely no idea that the documents resting in my simple leather tote bag proved I wasn't just a trespasser, I was the new owner of the entire building. What happens next is a lesson she will never, ever forget. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below before we dive into this story. To understand how I ended up facing down a screaming socialite while waiting for the police, you have to understand my grandfather. Arthur Sterling was a legend in the global hospitality industry. He built a multi-billion-dollar empire of luxury hotels, private resorts, and exclusive member clubs from the ground up. But despite his unimaginable wealth, he raised me with a singular, unbreakable rule: never let your net worth become your self-worth. When my parents passed away in a tragic accident when I was young, my grandfather took me in. He shielded me from the relentless, prying eyes of the media and the toxic, sycophantic high society that hovered around our family's fortune like vultures. I grew up under my mother's maiden name, Maya Lynn. To the world, Arthur Sterling had a fiercely guarded granddaughter, but no one knew my face, my name, or my whereabouts. I wanted it that way. I wanted to earn my degrees, build my skills, and navigate the world as an ordinary person. I wanted to be loved and valued for who I was, not for the massive trust fund attached to my bloodline. When my grandfather passed away peacefully 6 months ago, my world shattered. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket. But along with his passing came a staggering reality. I was the sole heir to the Sterling Empire. As part of my transition into taking over the company, the board of directors and I agreed on a 6-month quiet period. I would audit our flagship properties undercover, observing the operations, the management, and the culture from the ground level. That is how I ended up at the Lumiere in Boston. The Lumiere was the crown jewel of our East Coast portfolio. It was a sprawling, historic mansion converted into a hyper-exclusive club where the initiation fee alone was more than most people made in a decade. It was a place of dark mahogany paneling, vaulted ceilings, bespoke velvet furnishings, and a pervasive atmosphere of old money. For the past 3 weeks, I had been working there under the guise of a junior event coordinator. I wore simple, unbranded black slacks, sensible flats, and modest blouses. I fetched coffee, organized catering files, and stayed out of the way. And for 3 weeks, I watched the management and the elite members treat the service staff with a level of casual cruelty that made my blood boil. But no one was worse than Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor was the gatekeeper of Boston's high society. She was in her late 50s, perpetually dripping in diamonds, with a sharp, angular face that seemed permanently set in a sneer of disgust. She derived immense pleasure from humiliating people she deemed beneath her. I had watched her reduce a seasoned waitress to tears over a slightly bruised strawberry in her champagne. I had seen her snap her fingers at the valet like he was a stray dog. She was the exact type of person my grandfather despised, someone who believed that money bought them the right to abandon their basic humanity. If you love stories about toxic people getting exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. The inciting incident happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My undercover audit was officially ending today at 3 p.m. The Sterling Holding Company's board of directors was scheduled to arrive and formally introduce me to the club's general manager, a sycophantic man named Richard, who had spent the last 3 weeks treating me like a nuisance. It was 2:15 p.m. I had just finished my final shift as an event coordinator. I changed out of my staff uniform and put on my own clothes, a simple, well-tailored beige trench coat over a high-necked black dress. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant. I walked into the grand members lounge carrying my worn leather tote bag and sat down in a secluded leather wingback chair near the roaring fireplace to wait for the board's arrival. I was quietly sipping a glass of sparkling water, reviewing the legal transfer documents in my lap, when a sharp, nasally voice shattered the quiet atmosphere of the room. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you are doing?" I looked up. Eleanor Thorne was standing over me, her hands planted on her hips, her eyes scanning my simple outfit with absolute revulsion. She was accompanied by two of her equally wealthy, heavily Botoxed friends. "I'm waiting for a meeting, Mrs. Thorne," I said calmly, keeping my voice even. "A meeting?" Eleanor scoffed, her voice rising in pitch, intentionally drawing the attention of the other wealthy patrons in the room. "In the members' lounge? You are the little girl who was hauling folding chairs yesterday? You are staff. And unless I am severely mistaken, which I never am, staff is absolutely forbidden from sitting in the member areas." "I am no longer on the clock, Mrs. Thorne," I replied, maintaining perfect eye contact. "And I have business here today. I am well within my rights to wait." Eleanor's face flushed a deep, ugly, mottled red. Her eyes narrowed, darting to my dark hair and my features, and a cruel, knowing smirk crossed her face. "Business? People like you don't have business at the Lumiere? You people are so brazen these days. Do you think because you wear a clean coat, you can just infiltrate places that polite society has specifically built to keep you out? This is an exclusive establishment, not a public shelter." The racial undertones of her comment hung in the air, heavy and toxic. The room had gone completely silent. Dozens of eyes were watching us. A few members looked uncomfortable, but no one stepped forward. They were all too terrified of crossing Eleanor Thorne. Have you ever been completely underestimated or humiliated because of how you look or what you do? Drop a comment below and let me know how you handled it. I felt a hot spike of righteous anger in my chest, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind. "Dignity under pressure, Maya. Let them show you exactly who they are." "My presence here doesn't concern you, Mrs. Thorne," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I suggest you return to your tea and leave me be." "Leave you be?" she shrieked, the volume of her voice entirely unaristocratic. "Richard! Richard!" Within seconds, the club's general manager, Richard, came practically sprinting across the Persian rugs. He was a tall, thin man who always looked like he was one minor inconvenience away from a panic attack. When he saw Eleanor, he immediately bowed his head in deference. "Mrs. Thorne, is there a problem?" Richard asked, wringing his hands. "Yes, there is a massive problem, Richard," Eleanor spat, pointing a manicured finger an inch from my face. "Your help is sitting in my favorite reading area. She refuses to leave. She is speaking to me with incredible disrespect, and frankly, I feel unsafe with her lurking around my handbag." Richard turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and fury. "Maya, what on earth are you doing? You know the rules. Staff are never to be in the lounge. Get up immediately." "I told Mrs. Thorne, and I will tell you, Richard, I am waiting for an appointment. I have official business here at 3 p.m., I said, glancing at my watch. It was 2:30 p.m. "Don't lie to me," Richard hissed, stepping closer. "You're a junior coordinator. You don't have meetings here. You are embarrassing me in front of our most prestigious member. Leave the premises right now or you are fired." "You can't fire me, Richard," I said softly. Eleanor let out a bark of incredulous laughter. Did you hear that, Richard? She's defying you. She is clearly unhinged. She's probably casing the joint to steal from the coat check. I want her removed. Now. Maya, I am not asking, Richard said, his voice trembling with rage. Get out. Before I could respond, a calm, deep voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? I turned to see Julian standing a few feet away. Julian Hayes was a highly successful, brilliant architect who had been a member of the Lumiere for 2 years. Over my 3 weeks of working undercover, Julian was the only person who had treated me with genuine kindness. He always asked about my day, said please and thank you, and even stayed late one evening to help me pick up dropped catering menus when a sudden gust of wind blew them across the terrace. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a quiet strength that I found deeply compelling. He had no idea who I was, but he had seen me. Julian stepped between me and Eleanor, his tall frame shielding me slightly. Richard, Mrs. Thorne, I was sitting just across the room. Maya wasn't doing anything disruptive. She was just reading. Eleanor glared at Julian. Stay out of this, Julian. This girl is trespassing. She's insolent and she doesn't belong here. She said she has a meeting, Julian replied smoothly, his eyes flashing with quiet authority. I see no reason why she can't wait. He turned to me, his expression softening. Maya, are you all right? I'm fine, Julian. Thank you, I said softly, touched by his willingness to put his own social standing on the line for a supposed junior staff member. Eleanor was vibrating with rage at being contradicted. Fine, if management won't handle this feral girl, I will. She ripped her diamond-encrusted smartphone from her purse. I am calling the police. We will see how arrogant she is when she's leaving in handcuffs. Mrs. Thorne, that really isn't necessary, Richard pleaded, terrified of a scene. But Eleanor was already dialing. Yes, hello? Police? Yes, I am at the Lumiere Club on Beacon Hill. We have an aggressive trespasser refusing to leave the premises. She is harassing the members. Please send officers immediately. She hung up the phone and looked down at me with a triumphant, malicious smile. You are done, little girl. Your life is over. If you're loving this story so far and want to see this Karen get exactly what's coming to her, don't go anywhere. This is where it gets incredibly good. Subscribe now. The next 20 minutes were excruciating. Julian refused to leave my side, pulling up a chair directly next to mine, a silent sentinel of support. He leaned in close, his voice low. Maya, if you need a lawyer, I have one on retainer. You don't have to deal with this alone, he whispered. Thank you, Julian. Truly, I whispered back, a genuine smile touching my lips. But I promise you, I have it handled. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his handsome features, but he nodded, his presence unwavering. The room remained at a standstill. The other members had abandoned all pretense of minding their own business. They were openly staring, whispering behind their hands. Eleanor and her friends stood a few feet away, sipping their champagne, loudly discussing how the city was going downhill and how nobody wants to work anymore. At exactly 2:50 p.m., the heavy oak doors of the club swung open and 2 Boston police officers walked in, looking serious and imposing. Eleanor practically sprinted toward them. Officers, finally, right this way, this is the woman. She pointed at me like I was a highly dangerous fugitive. She is a former employee who is now trespassing, harassing members, and she refused to leave when the manager explicitly told her to. The officers approached me. Richard scurried behind them, nodding vigorously. It's true, officers. I am the general manager. I have asked her to leave, and she has refused. I want her trespassed from the property. One of the officers, a sturdy man with a graying mustache, looked down at me. Miss, if the manager wants you gone, you have to leave. If you refuse, I'll have to place you under arrest for criminal trespassing. Let's make this easy and step outside." Julian stood up abruptly. "Officers, this is a massive overreaction. She was just sitting here." "Sir, please step back," the second officer warned. I gently placed a hand on Julian's arm, signaling him to stop. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my trench coat. I looked at the officers, then at Richard, and finally my gaze landed on Eleanor's smug, triumphant face. "I completely understand your position, officers," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the dead silent room. "However, according to the bylaws of this club and the laws of this state, an owner cannot be trespassed from their own property." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucked the air out of the room. A pin drop would have sounded like a gunshot. Eleanor let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed harshly. "An owner? Oh my God, she is completely delusional. She's having a psychotic break. Officers, arrest this lunatic." Richard shook his head in disgust. "Maya, this is pathetic. Stop lying and get out before I press formal charges." I didn't answer them. Instead, I checked my watch. 2:59 p.m. "Right on time," I murmured. "Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. The payoff is worth every second." Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the club's front parlor, the street was visible. The rhythmic, heavy sound of powerful engines began to rumble through the glass, growing louder and louder until it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Outside, cutting through the Boston rain, a procession of 6 sleek, custom black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up to the curb, completely blocking the street. The lead vehicle bore the discreet, unmistakable gold crest of the Sterling Empire. The crowd inside the club murmured in confusion. Eleanor's mocking smile faltered slightly as she watched the doors of the SUVs swing open simultaneously. Out stepped 10 men and women immaculately dressed in high-end charcoal suits. They moved with military precision. Flanking them were 4 imposing private security guards wearing the dark burgundy ties that signaled my grandfather's personal elite detail. The heavy club doors were pulled open by the security team, and the board of directors of the Sterling Empire walked into the Lumiere. At the head of the group was Marcus Vance, the silver-haired, impeccably sharp chief legal counsel for the Sterling family. He was a man who commanded entire boardrooms with a single glance. He carried a heavy brass-bound leather portfolio. Richard, the manager, immediately paled. He recognized Marcus Vance. Everyone in high-end hospitality recognized Marcus Vance. Richard pushed past the police officers, his hands shaking as he practically tripped over himself to greet the new arrivals. "Mr. Vance, we had no idea you were arriving so soon. The formal transition meeting wasn't until 3?" Richard stammered, his eyes darting to the imposing security guards. "I am so sorry for the disruption. We are just dealing with a deranged trespasser." Marcus Vance didn't even look at Richard. He didn't break his stride. He walked straight past the trembling manager, straight past a frozen Eleanor Thorne, and straight past the bewildered police officers. He walked directly to me. When he reached me, Marcus Vance, a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars in his own right, stopped. He gave a deep, formal bow of his head. The other board members behind him mirrored the gesture. "Madam Chairwoman," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I apologize if we kept you waiting. The traffic from the airport was deplorable." The color rapidly, violently drained from Eleanor Thorne's face. She looked like someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. Her jaw went slack, her custom Chanel purse slipping from her fingers and hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. Richard let out a sound that was half gasp, half choke. "Chairwoman?" he squeaked. Marcus turned slowly to face the room. his eyes scanning the crowd with aristocratic disdain before settling on Richard and Eleanor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice booming, "allow me to introduce Maya Sterling, the sole heir to the Arthur Sterling estate, the majority shareholder of the Sterling Holding Company, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, the sole uncontested owner of the Lumiere Club." The police officers instantly took 2 steps back, their hands dropping away from their utility belts. Julian, standing next to me, let out a soft, breathy chuckle of absolute disbelief, a wide grin spreading across his face. Eleanor began to stutter, her previous arrogance completely vaporizing. "Sterling? Arthur Sterling's granddaughter? No, no, that's impossible. She was carrying chairs. She was fetching coffee." I stepped forward. The room parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked slowly toward Eleanor, who seemed to shrink in on herself with every step I took. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. True power is quiet. My grandfather taught me that the best way to understand the soul of a business is to look at how it treats its lowest paid employees, I said softly, my eyes locking onto Eleanor's terrified gaze. For 3 weeks, I have watched how this club operates, and what I found was a profound, rotting sickness, a culture of cruelty, elitism, and unchecked entitlement. I turned my gaze to Richard. The manager looked as though he might faint. "Richard," I said, my tone ice cold. "Miss Sterling, Maya, I was just following protocols, I swear. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I interrupted smoothly. "You chose cruelty when kindness cost you nothing. You empowered members to abuse your staff, and when a woman you believed to be powerless was being racially targeted and harassed in your lobby, your instinct was to throw her to the police to appease a bully." I held out my hand. Marcus Vance stepped forward and placed a heavy, golden signet ring, my grandfather's ring, into my palm. I slipped it onto my index finger. "Richard, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 5 minutes." 2 of the imposing guards stepped forward, flanking the weeping manager and marching him out of the room. Then I turned back to Eleanor. She held up her hands in a desperate, pathetic attempt at reconciliation. "Maya, Miss Sterling, please, this is all a dreadful misunderstanding, a terrible joke. My family has been members here for 40 years. We are legacy. We can sit down, have a drink, laugh about this." There is nothing to laugh about, Mrs. Thorne," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You revealed exactly who you are today. You judge human worth by the brand of a coat and the title on a name tag. You are a small, vicious woman who hides behind money because you have absolutely nothing else of value to offer the world." She recoiled as if I had physically struck her. "Your membership at the Lumiere is permanently revoked," I stated, the words landing like heavy stones in the silent room. "Furthermore, the Sterling Holding Company will no longer be doing business with Thorne Enterprises. All of our corporate accounts, event contracts, and sponsorships tied to your family are immediately severed. Marcus has the paperwork drawn up." Eleanor let out a sharp, devastated sob. The financial and social ruin I had just pronounced would completely devastate her family's standing in Boston. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally, for someone to defend her. But the crowd of witnesses, the very people she had tried to impress, physically turned their backs on her. She was entirely, utterly isolated. "Officers," I said, turning to the bewildered policeman, "I apologize for the false alarm. This woman is no longer a member of this club. If she refuses to leave the premises, I would like her arrested for trespassing." The poetry of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. The officers nodded sharply, stepping toward Eleanor. "Ma'am, it's time to go," the officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sobbing, utterly broken, and stripped of her perceived power, Eleanor Thorne was escorted out of the club she had ruled through terror for decades, her friends trailing behind her in silent shock. Once the doors closed behind her, a collective breath was released in the lounge. I turned away from the spectacle, dismissing it completely from my mind. I walked back over to where Julian was standing. He was leaning against the leather chair, arms crossed, looking at me with a mixture of awe and deep amusement. "So," Julian said, a slow, devastatingly handsome smile spreading across his face. "Does the owner of the club still need help carrying the catering files, or do you have people for that now?" I laughed, a genuine, warm sound that felt incredible after weeks of tension. "I think I can manage the files, but I might need someone to show me around the city, someone who isn't intimidated by a woman with a few too many secrets." Julian stepped closer, his eyes locked onto mine, completely unfazed by the wealth or the display of power. He saw me, just as he had an hour ago when I was nobody. "I think I can handle that." I took his arm, turning to Marcus. "Mr. Vance, let's begin the audit." I walked out of the lounge, not looking back. 6 months later, the Lumiere was unrecognizable. The old, toxic staff had been purged, replaced by management who paid excellent wages and treated everyone with respect. The club was still exclusive, but the criteria for entry was no longer just old money and bloodlines. It was character, philanthropy, and genuine achievement. Eleanor Thorne had become a social pariah, her family's businesses struggling massively after the Sterling Empire cut ties, proving that her power was always a fragile illusion. As for me, I was thriving. I had taken the reins of my grandfather's company, leading it with the empathy and quiet strength he had taught me. And by my side, at every major gala, every quiet Sunday morning, and every board meeting, was Julian. He had stood by me when I was a junior coordinator facing arrest, and now he stood by me as my partner in life. We often live in a world that tries to measure our value by the surface, by the cars we drive, the titles on our resumes, or the clothes on our backs, but true worth exists entirely independent of recognition. Cruelty, arrogance, and classism never reveal the inferiority of the victim. They only expose the deep, profound emptiness of the perpetrator. Never let anyone dictate your value based on their narrow view of the world. Hold your head high, maintain your dignity, and remember, the right people will see your crown long before you ever tell them you are royalty. Have you ever found out someone's true colors in a dramatic way? Share your story in the comments. And if you found this story satisfying, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their worth. And remember, your story isn't over yet.